5 days ago, Dr. Snyder called whatever condition my wife suffered from arthritis, due to the presence of the typical symptoms: stiffness in the finger and knee joints, neck cramps, body aches, inability to grip even a pen without profuse shaking. As the days droned on, however, it was evident that this was not arthritis. I wish it were. The X-ray images Dr. Snyder handed me from across her desk confirmed the nightmarish fears that sprouted from the darkest depths of my imagination. Abnormal bone growths, fusing of the joints, strange branch-like projections. Never seen such a case before. As if in snapshots, I heard only vague pieces of the sentences uttered by Dr. Snyder. I was far too engrossed within the medical imagery showing the anatomy of my wife's body to listen properly. I apologized to Dr. Snyder and asked her to repeat her words even slower, because I struggled to follow along. She nodded and then started explaining again, slowly guiding me through each image and interpreting the main findings. The pattern throughout all the images was how all the bones were fused together into a singular, cohesive mass. The most distinct instance of this was how the separate bones of her rib cage had all melded together into a solid unit. Similarly, all the different joints connecting most of her bones had fused together. All bones had also notably elongated and thickened, stretching out the thin sheet of her skin to its limits. The final, most gruesome observation made was the shape of her bones. Her arms, hands, legs, and feet all shared the same unnatural appearance. The bones in her limbs were gnarled, abnormally twisted in different directions like vines. Her fingers and toes twisted and wove in between each other, tangled in a messy circuitry of bone. Dr. Snyder ended her consultation with me by admitting that she had never before seen anything like it. Apparently, my wife harbored a completely new condition never before recorded in the history of medicine. Though she promised she was tirelessly working on a medical team to research ways to find treatments for my wife's condition, she solemnly informed me of the high possibility that she would not make it. It's painful to admit I was not exactly surprised at her statement, considering how suddenly and rapidly Safia's condition had deteriorated in the span of mere days. My wife had gone from a young, vibrant, healthy individual into someone who was permanently bound to her bed, screeching as her bones painfully and unnaturally contorted and grew beneath her skin. It struck me how quickly I had fought for the doctors to do everything to save her life in the past, but now I had grimly accepted the inevitable possibility of her death. The least I could do was to be by Safia's side for the remainder of her days. That very night I did exactly that. I sat in a chair by Safia's hospital bedside, gently stroking the bony mess of her ruined, abnormally shaped hand. Her dull eyes were slightly open, staring in a zoned-out manner at the ceiling. I don't think she even noticed I was there. Her mind was far too spaced out to notice the details in her environment, including me. Every day, Safia simply lay there like an unresponsive log, trapped within her pain. She barely slept either. The cocktail of drugs they pumped into her to try to lull her to sleep and ease her pain were not enough to help her. Eventually, past midnight, after several hours of watching over her, Safia muttered her first word to me in days. I could hardly believe it when a sound came out of her throat in a hoarse whisper. Richard. I inched over to her side, elated that she was finally speaking, even though it hurt to hear that it sounded like she was in pain from talking. As I gazed over her ghostly, gaunt face, she slowly opened her mouth as if to say something else, but the words were stuck in her throat. I hung patiently by her side, waiting for her to say what she needed. Suddenly, without warning, her mouth stretched taut and she screamed. A gut-wrenching, violent scream that scraped against my eardrums like sandpaper. That's when I heard the jarring noise of ripping, like paper being torn apart. Fissures snaked all across her body, as if her skin was forming cracks before abruptly splitting apart at the seams. Rip. The skin around her arm tore open and an elongated, white, milky thing jutted out like a pillar. a bone twisted and deformed in appearance. As the bone elongated, some flesh clung to the bone before bits and pieces of it dropped to the floor in a pink and crimson mess of meat and clots of human tissue. Along with the main arm bone, her smaller finger bones sliced out the skin, convoluted and tangled around each other like wires. Safia's screams heightened in volume and grew more agonized as her bony ribcage suddenly burst through her chest. By this stage, I heard a stampede of nurses enter the room, rushing to contain the situation. But all of them stopped dead in their tracks and stared blankly at the sight, unprepared to handle an event like this. Rip. More skin ripped off violently as the massive bone tore my wife apart from the inside, lengthy bones jutting out of her arms and body like oversized thorns. "Richard!" My wife's voice startled me from my trance, and I snapped my eyes across to focus on her face instead of her body being torn apart. "Richard, I love you. Rip." Right before she repeated her final words, her mouth and lips were swiftly ripped apart by the multitude of bones that suddenly spiked from her skull and jaw, skewering the skin and flesh draped over it. I didn't even have time to digest what happened, my wife's own death, because my vision was still assaulted by the horrifying transformation Safia's body was undergoing even after she died. The bones continued to grow haphazardly until the twisted mass eventually erupted completely out of Safia's body, shedding her sack of marred skin and flesh off itself. A few minutes stretched out into a gaping eternity, the transformation stopped, and the nurses and I stood and witnessed the final form her bones took. Glistening in the slivers of the moonlight that streamed through the curtains was the silhouette of something bearing the uncanny resemblance of a tree, still dripping with fresh blood. Two gnarly main branches stretched out from the thick trunk, and projecting outwards from the main branches still was a tangled circuitry of smaller twig-like branches. A cold wave of dread washed over me as I recognized that the two main branches used to be Safia's arms, and the twig-like branches used to be her fingers. The thickened, elongated trunk used to be my wife's abnormally shaped ribcage fused to her legs. I finally noticed that the network of tree roots firmly planted within the mattress of the hospital bed were formerly my wife's dainty toes. I vomited right then and there. The contents of my churning stomach came tumbling out onto the floor until it felt like there was nothing left to heave anymore. I barely recall much of what happened after that. I think I tried standing up straight, though it felt like my spinning head would not balance on my head anymore. There was blurred movement in my vision, a rush of air whistling past my ears, my body crashing to the floor, the panicked voices of the nurses surrounding me. I let go of the moment, and finally, my eyes gave up and shut. I had fainted, my body thankfully unable to keep me awake to lay witness to any more of the pure horror that had ravaged my vision. If anything, my brain did me a favor by letting me sleep, if only for a while. When my eyes opened again, I found myself laying under the crisp white and blue sheets of a hospital bed. My vision was still blurry, but as my eyes refocused, I found someone sitting beside the bed. It took me some time for my exhausted brain to piece together the jumbled features of the face into a face that was recognizable and familiar. It was Dr. Snyder. "Hi," she said, her voice soothing and gentle like falling flower petals, trying to make me feel at ease. As she gazed down at me with a small smile, I could see a certain emotion reflected in her dark eyes, and I slowly managed to put a finger on it. It was pity. Her voice cracked and shut off. I'm sorry," she managed to breathe out. "About Safia." The nurses told me what happened, and I came in and saw for myself. She drifted off after finishing her sentence, and her eyes became unseeing, misty, and clouded over, as if she was recalling the memory of the milky white bone tree that Safia had morphed into. After a few seconds, she snapped back to reality and brought her attention back to me. Now, I'm not here to let you relive those horrific moments because you need to rest and recover. I'm only here to check up personally on you until whatever time you feel is necessary to talk again, okay? I managed a silent nod. Dr. Snyder stood up from her seat and looked me over, as if to inspect my condition one last time before leaving. Her roving eyes came to stop midway through the inspection, as if something had caught her attention. Her eyes grew bigger in their sockets, and her mouth stretched open slightly, as if to gasp. "Your hands," she mumbled. I craned my head down to look at my hand lying on the bed. I had not noticed it yet, but they were vibrating ever so slightly, shaking uncontrollably. Then there was their appearance, swollen around the joints, crooked, gnarly, and not perfectly straight. A chill prickled my body as I made the familiar connection that they somewhat looked like tree branches. The truck stopped, coming to a halt a few yards from the barricade, not because the barricade would stop it, but because the driver found what he was looking for, the bus. It was clear that the driver was looking for the wires, implied by how swiftly he got on the road after Sarah informed him why the road was closed. The officers took one look at the vehicle and knew they were screwed. The helicopter descended and hovered next to the Marauder, but fled when it started being shot at by a man in the passenger seat. I noticed that was actually a news helicopter, which explains why it did that. One of the officers called the dispatcher. "We're gonna need backup. Send the U.S. military. There's no way we can force the driver to get out." The driver got on the truck's intercom. "This is the Red Moth auction hall. One of our clients reported an item stolen. We are here to retrieve it." Another officer grabbed a megaphone from her car to join the amplified shouting match. "Sir, that does not justify running over an officer's vehicle and invading the—" "Yes, it does. You wouldn't understand." While this was happening, a blue 2010 Ford pickup, along with a police cruiser escorting it, arrived at the bus yard from Riverside Street. The truck drove through the hole created by the bus and stopped beside us, and the officers in the police cruiser went to join whatever was happening at the intersection. An old man was inside the truck. Despite his age, he stepped out of the truck with ease. "Rough first day, huh?" he asked me. The guard and I stared at him in confusion. The students stared at us in confusion, giving us a look that said, "Wait, you don't know this guy?" After an awkward moment of silence, the man identified himself. "Oh, I'm Ernest Fredrickson, the dude who hired you. Sorry about that." Not knowing who this guy was, a million questions went through my head, but before I could ask any of those questions, the driver of the Marauder opened his door to throw grenades at the officer. But he made a fatal mistake. Either he didn't notice us standing less than 20 feet away, or he didn't expect us to intervene. This is when I leapt into action. I grabbed the guard's hand and we ran to the truck. Ernest pulled out his concealed firearm and joined us. The driver noticed us and quickly threw the grenades he already activated in advance and tried to close the door. But before he was able to, I managed to get my left wrist stuck between the door and the wall of the truck, stopping the door from being closed. The driver attempted to repeatedly slam the door on my wrist, hoping that I would remove it because of the pain, but I didn't. While this was happening, the guard and Ernest opened fire at the driver. About half the bullets struck the door, but the other half managed to get into the cab, and most of those hit the driver. We ripped the door out of the dead man's grip, and I climbed into the truck to unbuckle his seatbelt so we could remove the corpse from the seat. But when I climbed onto the side of the truck, I found another man in the passenger seat with the exact same attire as the driver, that being what seemed to be a black version of what the U.S. Army wears. I noticed he had a rifle, so I was forced to shoot him to avoid being shot myself. All of that happened in less than 10 seconds. The grenades the driver threw earlier landed behind the car barricade and blew up, injuring several officers. Some of the surviving officers tended to the injured ones, while the rest came over to the Marauder to inspect it. The three of us returned to the yard where the kids were. Shortly after the officers entered the Marauder, the back doors opened and 8 men rushed out of the truck. They all had the same attire as the 2 in the front, and 3 of them had briefcases for some reason. 5 officers chased them on foot. We all thought that this was the end, as none of them had any weapons. Or at least we thought. The ones with the briefcases stopped for a moment and threw their briefcases at the officers. One of them managed to strike an officer, knocking him to the ground. But the briefcases had another use other than being a projectile, because as the officers passed them, they were detonated, causing a massive explosion. Chunks of briefcase were flung outward, functioning as shrapnel. One of them hit Tommy, 2 hit the girl who was being strangled by a wire earlier, 1 hit Angela, and 2 more each hit me and Ernest. Luckily, we all survived with minor injuries. When the smoke cleared up, we saw the scene that lied before us. The Marauder suffered very little damage, and the bus's body was heavily damaged but still intact, including the windows. The windshield was struck by 4 briefcase chunks, leaving spiderweb cracks where they collided with the windshield. The body of the police cars were ripped apart from the force of the explosion, and the fuel tanks were spilling gasoline all over the road. Even the traffic lights at the intersection were bent. 7 ambulances arrived from Riverside Street, intending to treat the officers injured by the grenade explosion, but found far more than they bargained for. But, in a dark twist of irony, this was still enough ambulances to transport the surviving officers to the hospital. Out of the 8 men in the back of the Marauder, 5 of them survived with minor injuries. The other 3 were either dead or seriously injured. All 7 of the kids hid in a guard shack as the guard, Ernest, and I approached the group with our weapons drawn. As soon as they saw us, the healthy ones dropped their injured comrades and fled down Route 3 on foot, in the same direction the Marauder came from. The 3 of us chased them and managed to shoot all 5 of them. We walked back to the yard and saw a man talking with the paramedics. "What do you mean? The snack bar right there. What do you mean it's not open?" Crap. They didn't know. Rule number 4. At any time, a man may show up thinking your shack is a snack bar. Give him something to eat, or you'll be the snack. If you cannot give him a snack due to Rule 2, call us and continue hiding until we've dealt with the situation. We continued approaching the ambulances, but still tried not to attract the man's attention. "Sir, we are paramedics. We do not have a snack bar." The man went from annoyed to angry. His voice became incredibly deep and demonic. "Give me a snack, right now." The paramedics stared at the man, very confused at what just happened. The man's fingernails grew incredibly quickly, and they transformed into claws in the process. He used his Wolverine hands to attack the man, peeling off a thick and large chunk of his forearm. The paramedic ran off and screamed in agony due to being literally skinned alive. The man's fingernails broke off and the man returned to normal. "Thank you. Have a nice day," he said as if he bought this chunk of human flesh from a snack bar. He left in the direction he seemed to have come from. Several shadow figures appeared near him and wandered aimlessly. Rule 7. If you see a shadow figure roaming the nearby area, pretend it doesn't exist. Do not let it know it has physically entered our world. I walked up to the paramedics to inform them of Rule 7. Luckily, they complied, and as they all witnessed what happens if you break Rule 4. The paramedics continued loading the injured officers into the ambulances, with one that was skinned alive joining them, when a heavy-duty tow truck that was going way too fast to Riverside Street bashed through 2 of the ambulances that were in its way while making a sharp right turn into the left lane of Route 3, almost flipping over in the process. This truck was definitely able to tow the bus, and that's exactly what they did. The truck reversed to the bus and 2 men got out, also identical to the 10 in the Marauder, and quickly hooked up the bus to the tow cable. The men got back into their truck and sped off in the direction the truck was facing. This all happened within 15 seconds. The paramedics were about to nope out of there, but the men in the tow truck didn't have time to attack them. Both of the ambulances that were damaged were still drivable. One of the paramedics was injured by the truck's crash, having been ran over by his own ambulance, and had to be transported to the hospital by his co-workers. He's expected to make a full recovery. Out of the 17 officers that were at this war zone, only 7 survived. All 5 of the officers that were pursuing the men were blown to bits due to being so close to the explosion. 3 officers were inside of the Marauder at the time of the explosion, and they all survived with virtually no injuries. 7 officers were injured by the grenades. Out of them, 4 were declared dead at the scene. 2 died on the way to the hospital, and only 1 survived. She is severely injured but is expected to make a full recovery. Out of the 4 officers tending to the injured 7, 1 died at the scene, 1 was critically injured, and the other 2 survived with minor injuries as they were behind the bus at the time. The one that was critically injured is also expected to make a full recovery. I don't know where the other 6 officers were at the time of the explosion, but they all died at the scene. When interviewed, I told them what happened and explained that I said snakes because they wouldn't believe me if I told them the truth. The only difference is that I said a pile of copper wires was next to a bus stop and they invaded the bus. The students all told the same lie. Ernest, the guard, and the surviving officers backed up my story, saying that there were wires on the bus. None of us were charged with anything, and the 3 of us that raided the Marauder were praised for our bravery. All 10 of the men died at the scene. Their corpses couldn't be identified. The Marauder was impounded by the police. Its license plate revealed that the vehicle was registered under the name Alfred Cornell, with the address being residence somewhere in Maine. The police went to that location, but they found an empty lot in a semi-remote location with nothing on it other than a brick wall that was 20 feet by 8 feet and 1 foot wide. The tow truck and my bus were never seen again, for now at least. Ernest tried to track down the bus, but its tracker was disabled somehow. The news station that tried to film this massacre was ordered by the federal government to delete the limited footage they captured and to never speak of this until further notice. The rest of us that witnessed the event were essentially given NDAs by the government. The family members of the dead officers were given large settlements. The surviving officers had their medical bills paid for and were given a smaller settlement for their troubles. The 7 students that didn't make it to their stop were taken care of by Ernest, his wife, and 3 middle-aged children until they can be returned home. Ernest told me that I wasn't actually being paid $20 an hour. The ad was only listed that way to not attract unwanted attention. I was actually being paid $200 an hour, and he gave me a $1,000 bonus for my troubles today. The guard's wage was also multiplied by 10, and he also got a $1,000 bonus. I told Ernest what actually happened, and we now have a 14th rule for the bus drivers. Rule 14. Do not steal from the mansion owners, because they will find you, and they will do whatever it takes to get their stuff back. My girlfriend moved out 3 weeks ago. My cat, Ruck, was really close to her, and now that she's gone, I can tell he's a bit lonely, especially when I'm at work. I came home a few times to my curtains ripped up or all the toilet paper in shreds. The last straw was when I came home after working late to find he had clawed a hole the size of a dinner plate into the side of the sofa. I decided I had to do something. I tried different toys, even catnip, but nothing worked. One night, while browsing Amazon, I saw a pet camera. It's a tiny camera that records your pet on a live feed so you can monitor their behavior while you're away. It even has an audio function so you can talk to them. Sounded silly, but hey, I love my furry dude, so I bought it. I got overnight shipping and installed it immediately. I decided to set it up in my bedroom, as that is where Ruck dwelled the most. My first day at work, I think I checked that camera 30 times. When I spoke into the microphone, Ruck seemed to be happier, and I noticed there was no destruction around the house either. By day 4, I figured I'd solve the problem with Ruck. That leads me to right now. About 30 minutes ago, I climbed in bed with Ruck, ready to close my eyes, when my phone buzzed. A notification from the pet cam. I almost ignored it, sure I'd just triggered the thing, but I opened it anyway. What I saw made my grip tighten on the phone. Instead of a photo of myself in bed, I saw a man, tall, gangly, with pale skin and large eyes. He was moving into my room with exaggerated steps, like a sneaking cartoon character. He got right up to the lens, so close I could almost smell his rotten breath, and he smiled. I immediately paused the video, terrified. I looked at the spot where the man should have been standing, but there was no one there. I went onto Amazon and found the pet cam, and read the reviews hoping for some weird glitch. It had to be a joke, right? The first dozen reviews were pretty standard, but it was the last that caused me to bolt upright. The customer complained that the camera was on a time delay, sometimes as much as 15 minutes. I went back to the video and pressed play with shaky fingers. I watched in horror as the man slithered under my bed, giving the camera a wink before disappearing in the darkness. Then I saw myself enter the room and climb in bed before the video ended. Now I'm sitting in my bed, knowing he's under it. I could call the police, but I doubt I'd have time. So please, do yourselves a favor and read the reviews. New channels added was the message that appeared on my TV when I turned it on. I was curious as to what channels could have been added, and I was a bit excited, as I was getting sick of the same news, sports, and movie channels that I constantly flick through. I brought up the TV guide and scrolled through, looking at what new channels I now had access to. There were a couple of standard ones, showing reruns of old sitcoms, a channel that was exclusively for sheepdog trials, and one that showed infomercials. I was pretty disappointed in the new selection, and in only 10 minutes I had flicked past all of them and gotten bored. I decided to scroll through all of the channels once more in case something more exciting was now playing. I went through the station playing an old episode of Friends. I quickly skipped over the sheepdog trials, and I landed on the infomercial channel. I don't know what it was that compelled me to keep watching the station. Maybe it was the man wearing the bright purple suit, maybe it was the nice golden watch that they were selling, or maybe it was the way the man in the bright purple suit was smiling at me. Whatever the reason though, I ended up engrossed in this channel and continued to watch. This 24 karat gold watch is just the thing you need to show off to your friends, the man in the purple suit was saying. And for today's special, you can get it for just 3 easy payments of $19.99. No way can that be real, I thought. A real golden watch for only $60? I continued to watch the advert, and the man kept on going with his sales pitch. Certified real gold, and for the low price of 3 payments of $19.99, he said while smiling, and it can all be yours today. He continued to speak, all while smiling straight at the camera, straight at me. I don't know what compelled me to pick up the phone and dial the number that was on the screen. The way the man smiled at me, and the way he told me that I needed this watch, made me feel secure, and made me feel like I should ring and order one. As soon as I entered the number into my phone and hit dial, a voice on the other end suddenly answered. "Hello, I suppose you are ringing about the watches," a woman's voice said. Yeah, I was wondering if they are actually real gold, and if they're actually only 3 payments of $19.99, I asked. "Of course they are," she replied, in a way that wasn't condescending, but wasn't really polite either. "We are not here to scam you. We are here to help you out with a good deal." I thought about it for a moment and then decided that I would purchase one. If they turned out to be real, then I was spending $60 on something that could be worth a small fortune. so why not? I placed my order by giving my name, my bank details, and my address so that it could be shipped out to me. The lady on the phone told me to expect my order in the next 3 to 5 business days. I hung up the phone and turned off the TV, happy with my purchase. I then decided to head outside and play with my dog for a while. As we played fetch, all I could think about was the watch and whether or not it would be real. I patiently waited over the next few days, and on the 4th day after placing my order, I heard a van out front. It stopped just outside of my house. I heard it idle for around 20 seconds, and then I heard it take off again. I went out the front of my house and collected the box that I found sitting at the front of my yard. I took it inside and opened it. Inside, I found a shiny golden watch that was sitting inside of a small box. I picked it up and a closer look at it and was amazed at the way the sun bounced off of what appeared to be pure gold. I knew that there was only one way to find out its true value, and that was to take it to a jeweler and have it evaluated. Later that day, I found myself at the jewelry store, watching an older man looking at my watch through a magnifying glass. He had been studying it for over 10 minutes now. Eventually, he placed the magnifying glass down and looked up at me. "Very impressive watch you have here, sir," he said. "Very impressive indeed." He delicately handed me back the watch and began saying a sentence that would change my life. I would say that, in its current condition, this watch is worth around $55,000. I couldn't believe it. How could somewhere sell a watch worth that much for so cheap? I stood in shock for a while before thanking the jeweler and leaving the store. Once I got home, I placed the watch on my kitchen table and just stared at it in disbelief. I had a small fortune sitting in front of me, and I had barely paid anything for it. Something inside of me then told me to find the station again and to see what other items they may be selling. I went over to the television and turned it on, went to the TV guide, and found the station once more. Once again, the man in the purple suit was staring right into the camera. This time, however, he was holding 2 small birds, one in each hand. "These racing pigeons may look ordinary, but they are really something else," he was saying excitedly. "Worth at over $200,000 each, these birds are a great investment, and for today only, we have the great deal of buy one, get one 50% off." As he was talking, a phone number appeared on the screen. I saw that this number was different from the last time, but I thought this could be because it was for a different product. The one thing the man didn't mention was the price, but after getting the watches so cheap, I thought that these birds probably wouldn't cost too much. I had never thought about owning birds. I got enough love for my dog, and so had never considered buying another pet. However, the man said that they were worth over $200,000 each, so I knew I had to have them. I typed the number on the screen into my phone and hit dial. Once again, a woman answered the phone straight away, but I could tell by the voice that it was a different woman than last time. "You must have enjoyed your watch if you are already ordering again," she said and gave a slight chuckle afterwards. I was a bit taken aback, but I realized they probably had my number saved and that's how she knew. "I was very satisfied with my watch, thank you," I replied. "Now, I am interested in those racing pigeons you have for sale." "Oh yes, the buy one, get one 50% sale?" she asked. "Yeah, that's the one. I was wondering how much they were," I asked her. "Don't worry about the price, hun. They are worth a lot more than what we will charge you for them," she answered. "But a small payment will be taken from you. I have put your order through and so expect them to arrive in 2 to 3 days. Suddenly, she hung up. Before I even had a chance to respond, she was gone. I didn't know what she meant by a small payment. I had many questions, so I dialed the number again, but this time the call didn't go through. There was just silence. I tried not to think about it too much over the next couple of days. I'm sure everything will be okay, I thought. I constantly checked my bank account to see if any money had been taken out, but nothing had been. 3 days later, though, I was awoken early in the morning by the sound of a van parking out in front of my house, idling for a bit, and then driving away. I knew exactly what it was. My delivery had arrived. I got out of bed and went outside and saw a small box sitting on my front lawn. Small air holes were cut into the box, and I could hear the sound of something flapping inside, sounding like it was trying to get out. I picked up the box and took it inside and decided to open it. The sight that greeted me inside the box will be something that will always haunt me. The first thing that hit me when I opened the box was the smell. The strong, overpowering stench smelt like rotting meat. Suddenly, a bird flew upwards out of the box, hitting me in the face with its wing on the way out. This dazed me for a couple seconds, and then I looked up at the bird that was now flying around my kitchen. It was definitely a pigeon, and hopefully an expensive one. I then looked back down into the box to see the other pigeon, and then I saw it. Covered in blood, at the bottom of the box was the top half of a pigeon. Its head and half of its body were lying in the box. Its bottom half was nowhere to be seen. Blood covered the entire bottom of the box, and the pigeon's dead eyes were looking up at me. I let out a scream and pushed the box away from me. I couldn't believe what I had seen. I was disturbed. Who could do something like this? I thought. What kind of television station would send something like this out? I now understood what they meant by 50% off, though. I didn't know what to do with the package, and I couldn't bring myself to look at it again, so it stayed sitting on my kitchen table. I sat in my lounge room, trying to get away from the package. I once again checked my bank account, and still no payment had been made. This made me curious as to what the payment would be, and also made me extremely worried about what the payment would be. That's when I heard it again. The van. It pulled up outside of my house. I got up out of my chair and went to open the front door to head outside to see the van. That's when I hesitated. I didn't know who was inside of the van or what they wanted with me. I stood there for maybe a minute, still listening to the van idle out in front of my house. I managed to finally work up the courage to open the door. I stepped outside just as the van was speeding off. It was a dark black van, and all of the windows had been blacked out too. It sped away quickly, and I barely made it out the front door before the van had disappeared. I was worried now, wondering what they wanted with me and what they were doing. I went back inside and sat back down, making sure to avoid looking at the box in the kitchen table on the way through. I sat for maybe 20 minutes before I decided to go outside to see my dog, because I knew he would be able to provide me with some comfort. I went outside and called out to the dog, and usually when I do that, he comes straight over. But today he didn't. In fact, I couldn't see him anywhere in the back garden. I looked all over for him, calling out his name, but I never got any response. I had a terrible feeling in my stomach. My missing dog in the van. I knew they were connected somehow. For whatever reason, I decided to turn on the TV, and as soon as I did, I saw him. My dog. The man in the purple suit was standing there, patting him on his head, staring straight at me while doing it. There was also another dog standing next to mine. The last thing I heard the man say before my TV turned to static was, "And for today only, we have the great deal of buy one, get one 50% off." My parents live about half an hour from the city I live in. They live out in the mountains on a pretty big property. Their house is back maybe half a mile from the road and completely surrounded by woods. When we first moved in there, I was 5 years old. I remember going out there several times while my parents were building the house, running through what would one day be walls, and playing games with my siblings with the discarded nails and washers in the unfinished house. When we first moved in, I remember being excited by the dense woods that surrounded our house. As I got older, me and my siblings spent all day playing games and running around in the woods. I remember my friends coming and being scared of the woods, not wanting to run around in them the way me and my siblings did. My parents joked that in moving, we all had become wild mountain children. The thing is, while we would run around in the woods all day long, we never strayed far from the lights of our house during the night. There wasn't really a reason. We were allowed in the woods whenever we wanted, but it was like the darkness made a barrier we were not bold enough to cross. There were a lot of paranormal things that happened when I was growing up, but this story is by far the scariest thing I remember happening. At the time, I shared a room with two of my younger sisters. I was maybe 10 years old at the time. I was sleeping when I heard the door to our room open. I rolled over, expecting to see one of my parents standing in the doorway and the hall light streaming into our room. Instead, I found a dark, empty hallway. I looked over at my sister's bed and found it empty. She was the youngest and sometimes sleepwalked around the room or our house late at night. Worried that she had gotten up and would hurt herself or not make it back to bed, I got up to look for her. The bathroom and hallway were empty. I creeped up to my parents' door to see if they were awake and found it locked. Knowing I would likely get in trouble if she was found sleeping somewhere other than her bed the next morning, I creeped slowly downstairs to look for her. Our house had a pretty open design. From the bottom of the stairs you could see the living room, kitchen, dining room, and both the front and back doors. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I found the entire house bathed in only moonlight, meaning that my parents were already in bed. However, the back door was standing open and I saw my little sister standing in our sandbox outside. I ran to the back door, grabbing a pair of my shoes, and hurried out to try and get her. The sandbox was only a few yards from the back door, but it stood right on the edge of the portion of the property that had been cleared of trees for the house. In the minute it took me to look away and grab my shoes, my sister was gone. I scrambled out the door, flipped on the porch light, and pulled the door closed behind me. I blinked in the harsh yellow hue of the porch light before staring out into the dark tree line. The puddle of light just reached the edge of the sandbox. I ran to the sandbox, calling out for my sister. I couldn't see her anywhere, but there was definitely bare footprints in the sandbox that hadn't been there when we came in for dinner earlier. I glanced around desperately, searching the poorly illuminated tree line for my sister. Then I caught a flash of her pink nightgown disappearing into the trees on the other side of the yard from the sandbox. I tore off into the darkness behind her. She seemed to be gliding through the trees, moving much faster than I had ever seen her move before. I called out to her again and again, but it seemed my cries fell on deaf ears. I had seen my sister sleepwalk before. She was usually slow and disoriented. I had seen her walk into doors and walls, stumbling around half asleep before. Now, however, she glided through the trees with such speed and accuracy, I was having a hard time keeping up with her. I snagged my shirt on a branch and had to stop and pull it loose. In that time, my sister disappeared again. This was the first time I realized I was alone, in the woods, at night. I glanced around desperately for a sign of the path we had taken or a glimpse of our house in its porch light, but I couldn't find either. I screamed for my sister again as tears started to roll down my cheeks. I knew I wasn't lost, but I also wasn't sure where I was. The woods looked so different in the dark. Suddenly, I heard what sounded like my mom's voice. "You shouldn't have come out here." It rasped from the darkness. "Mom?" I asked, looking around wildly. "Only those chosen to enter during the dark hours may leave unscathed." I spun around again, looking for my mom, my sister, or the source of this voice, but was greeted only by the shadowy outlines of moonlit evergreens. I felt panic begin to build in my chest as I heard the yips of coyotes as I stared into the darkness. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on edges as I felt a hot breath on the back of my neck. I screamed and spun around, only to find nothing behind me. Without thinking, I took off running as fast as I could in what I guessed was the direction I had come from. Tears streamed down my face as the woods filled with the sounds of animals and laughter. When I finally broke through the trees into the backyard, I tripped and fell into the sandbox. As I lay there, face in the sand, I felt strong hands press me down into the sand. In my dad's voice I heard, "You were not invited. You were not chosen. Do not return." Then it was just gone. I rolled over and stared up at the night sky, breathing in sharp, painful breaths, my whole body shaking. After that, I don't really remember what happened until the next morning. When I woke up, me and my sister were both in our beds. Although my skin bore the marks of someone who had run through the woods in the dark. My arms and legs were scratched up, and there was still sand in my hair. I looked over in panic to see my little sister, who looked like she hadn't left her bed all night. In fact, the only thing that was different about her than I remembered from before was her nightgown. She had been wearing her favorite pink Hello Kitty nightgown when she went to bed. I was sure of it, but instead, she was now sleeping in a green nightgown that I couldn't remember having seen her wear before. I don't think I ever saw that pink nightgown again after that night. My mom even freaked out a little the next time she did laundry because she couldn't find it, and she was sure my sister would be upset. However, it seemed something about that night changed things about my sister. It was almost like she was a different person. Not that anyone ever believed me. After all, 4-year-olds change their minds on things they love all the time. Hey guys, thanks for joining me today on Horror Time Story Time. Hope you enjoyed the stories as much as I did. I think for my next one, I am actually going to delve into some other r/s on Reddit. Probably going to look at more of the personal horror stories that are out there. So maybe r/let's not meet or something along those lines. As always, if you have a story that you'd like to share with me, go ahead and send that over to reisnernails@outlook.com, and I'd be happy to put that in the next video. Thanks again, friends. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will catch you in the next one.